be talking and what we'll be doing as with most of our extension work with master gardeners. Um, Basically, what Penn State wants you to know is that whether it's the volunteer master gardeners, the professional educators, or folks that are working all through the extension work, there's a heavy, heavy push on not just providing curated academic quality information, but also for it to be evidence-based and science-based, so that the things that we're pushing out there are backed up by peer-reviewed journals and trials and things like that. We have a trials garden. We've got different projects that are going both at a state and a county level. Just a very quick blurb about me. I've been a master gardener for the Delaware County Group since 2011. My initial project was on pollinator gardens. We did a pollinator garden restoration at Smedley Park. I have a BS in biology from Temple. I've got some sustainable design and permaculture training. I was once trained by Mel Bartholomew from the Square Foot Gardening Foundation. He also had a show on PBS at one point. We did some accessible gardening for people in wheelchairs and the handicapped. And we did some senior gardening. I'm also the chair of the Horticulture and Healing, which is a nonprofit based out of Swarthmore for the greater Philadelphia area. I'm an exhibitor with my family in the Philadelphia Flower Show and with Horticulture and Healing. And I'm a member of the Speakers Bureau for the Delaware County Master Gardeners. This is just a quick collage of pictures of my family when they love me, just to kind of show you some of the things we do as a group. We do some community gardening. We're involved with Keeping Pennsylvania Beautiful. But we get in there and do some of the, we do some flower show exhibits, both in the horticulture, the horticourt at the PHS Philadelphia Flower Show. We're in the cuttings. We do a little bit. You can see my daughter there prepping in some of those accessible square foot gardening bins on some tarp. And you can see my youngest child there with the in the wood chips, and trying to stay active in gardening and do it sort of on a family and community level. And really, just my personal experience is that gardening really connects people. I mean, even hermits really enjoy gardening and really enjoy showing off their favorite plant and things like that at the show. So it's a very collaborative but also individualized pursuit. So just wanted to get a little bit into our topic tonight on houseplants, and just to talk to you about the explosion that's going on in houseplants right now. Just current stats, and these are as of a year or so ago. So these aren't even taking into consideration everything that's going on in houseplants today. Basically, 2/3 of U.S. households have at least one houseplant. So that's sort of like your beginning metric. And you can kind of see that in the millennial age range, we're seeing like an explosion of plants. Millennials, even though they've been very successful as a group in both academia and industry, they've also experienced run into some of the hardest. And they've sort of they've watched real estate prices really kind of climb. A lot of home ownership in certain markets where they're being employed is difficult to acquire. They're in rented spaces. They're in smaller spaces. And they've made, as a group, the trend has been to invest more in mobile investments, and houseplants are fantastic investments. So they're basically a huge part of the 72 million people that are, of these 72 million people in the U.S. that, basically 7.5 out of 10 of them own houseplants. We've seen at least a 20% increase in the overall houseplant demand during the COVID epidemic. We're expected to see double-digit forecasts going into the future. As of last year, it was a $16 billion houseplant market in the U.S. We already know that that's extremely understated. It's much, much bigger than that, and it's growing like in a log scale fashion. The average household used to spend $600 to $700 on gardening. That included houseplants, garden tools, seeds, dirt, compost. That was it. They went to Home Depot and they spent $600 or $700 in aggregate. Now millennials are spending thousands of dollars in the first couple of years of their hobby on plants. They're buying very good cultivars of plants. They're maybe trying a plant or two and then moving on to something that has a little bit less growth, a little bit requires a little bit more maintenance to it, and they're really and they're networking. They're, even though a lot of times they're not meeting people in person, they are online. They're on YouTube. They're in their social media groups. They're in special groups where they're talking about just their plant. Like, this is just the pothos board. This is just the ZZ plant board. And it's not just millennials. Everybody has had an interest in plants. The Zs and all the younger generations as well are really, really embracing houseplants, and it's fantastic. I think for those of us that have been in the horticultural pursuits as a hobby or profession for a while, we've always wanted this. There's not going to be horticulturalists in the future. There was a sharp decline in the profession, and the hobby was in trouble. And that's completely rebounded, and it's just really it's really amazing. The downside of it is the cost. The cost has really swung up. If you're going to look for certain plants that you would have looked for 3 years ago, don't be surprised that they've doubled in price or tripled in price, and that you have a hard time getting them. Demand has driven interest in some different types and cultivars. So you're going to see different cultivars come on the market or in the trade each year. But for the most part, you're going to see the price gets pushed up. Demand's pushing it completely on its own, but also the increase in energy costs and transportation, because a lot of these plants, even though they're native to North America, they're still Southern or Mexican types. Like a Schflera is a potted indoor plant here in this climate, but it grows native as a shrub in Florida, and you'll see it all over Disney World and everywhere else that you go to visit down in the South. Some plants that you'd see in Key West or in Fort Lauderdale, they're houseplants here, but down there they grow as a very low-cost shrubbery. So in order to move those plants, in a good way, at a good stage in growth, that are trained properly and pruned properly and taken care of properly, and to get them up north, it requires a little bit of energy as well. And the average homeowner kills 7 plants a year. I've killed way more than 7 plants a year. I've killed 7 times 7 plants at least. I've been a houseplant killer in my early years quite a bit. It happens. It takes you a while to learn the different requirements of a plant. And that's why it's kind of best to sort of phase in your plants. Start with an easy plant, get a next easy plant, get a next easy plant, have 10 to 12 easy plants, then move on to something that's more difficult. See how you make it through a vacation. See how you make it during the pandemic when you leave them in the office or leave them at your family member's home. But definitely step them in. So what's so special about houseplants? Like, what's causing this surge? And basically, there's a lot of studies about the benefits of houseplants, just besides the aesthetics. 15 minutes of interacting with houseplants decreases your cortisone levels in your blood, reduces stress. Houseplants have been known to increase productivity by at least 20%. That's not quite as good as coffee, but that's still a pretty good number. Houseplants in the office, there's lots of studies that are done on this. Houseplants in the office lead workers to take less sick days, whether they're their own plants or whether they're company-sponsored plants. Houseplants can remove up to 80% of airborne toxins in the air, but occupational health people will still tell us that you really need improved ventilation and a good HEPA filter to really clean air, particularly in a deeper footprint of a building or in a living arrangement. Greening is a major element in sustainable and adaptive design. We see a lot of biophilic design that's in tune with nature. So you'll see people are incorporating more wall hangings, more hanging plants, more vertical gardening type things, both internal and external walls. But you're seeing more of this inside. You'll see varying degrees of fresh and preserved moss as sculptures on walls. And taking a plant, putting it in a pot, putting the right amount of dressing on it and watering it, putting it on a saucer or a dish, and putting it in the right place. It's a very simple and effective way to improve your habitat one piece by one piece. And your house plants are portable. Some plants, some of the alocasias, like the elephant ears and things like that, the plants that you need to support that much dirt make the pots extremely heavy. So some plants need to be on wheels, or they're not as portable. But for the most part, everything that you put in a container is, in theory, portable, which makes this really a portable investment in your future habitat. Just an example, this is probably one of the easiest plants to propagate. This is Chlorophytum comosum. Everybody knows this is the spider plant. Got one right here. The cultivars for a spider plant come in different shapes and sizes. The variegation, that's the difference in the colors that are both, white, yellow, cream, and green. They change by the banding from the center of the plant out. And so it can have different thickness. The leaf thickness and width can change. But they're tough plants. They're very easy to grow. They require very little maintenance, maybe, watering every other day or every third day. They can go a week without watering. You can water them really well before you leave on vacation, come back 10 days later, and it would still be okay in most cases. They like moist soil, but they also would you want them to drain quite a bit in between. They do very good in indirect light. They can tolerate some direct light or bent light, redirected light, and it's really a great plant for beginners. One of the things you'll notice is that on the spider plant, you'll notice that the way that they start to propagate themselves through their self-propagation is they'll send out little plantlets. And basically, you can literally cut them at the plantlet level and get them into water, and they'll start to root. Sometimes, depending on the conditions, they'll start to root within days, but definitely within weeks, and you have a whole new plant. So spider plants do not cost a lot. It's a low-cost plant even now. You can get a spider plant at Meadowbrook or Longwood's Plant Shop or Home Depot. For anywhere from $16 to $30, depending on the size and how well it's grown out. They're very hardy plants. They're really wonderful. This Bonnie cultivar is the one you see on the left. This Bonnie variegated one is it's starting to pop. It's starting to self-propagate. Those can all be, cut off and started. And then the zebra one you kind of see has a little bit different. Some of them have almost no variegation in them. Some of them are very thin-leaved. Some of them are thick-leaved. Very beautiful plant, can be done as a hanging basket, a hanging plant, something that's off the edge of a desk or a table. Just really a fantastic plant. Now, one of the problems that happens with spider plants is brown tips. And if you've been to the flower show, if you've been to the horticourt, if you've been to anyone's home, you've seen brown tips. It's something that has a couple causes. One of it is too much or too little water. That's its own form of what they call chlorosis, or this yellowing. It's a problem with water. Sometimes it's a problem with the soil, but chlorophytum plants, they tolerate soil conditions pretty well. So it's almost usually the water. If there's low humidity, it might be so low and so dry that they need a little bit more, but watering pretty much usually takes care of it. Sometimes when there's fluoride or there's heavy buildup in the water, that's the problem. Sometimes if you want to take your water and put it through a Brita filter or use bottled water just to kind of see for a while how it would go, if that starts to clear it up. Salt buildup happens from over-fertilizing. So if you're using a Miracle-Gro mix, like a ready-to-apply mix, and you're hitting it every month, it's probably too much. Maybe it needs every 6 to 8 weeks or so. So you start to see it burn a little bit. And from too much light exposure, you'll almost always see it when it's too close to a southern facing window, or maybe the windows where you are, they're bending the light, or there's just a sunny time of the year. The winter sun's different than the summer sun, and it just comes in and starts to fry your plants. But those are all different things you can do between the placement and the water and the temperature to alleviate the problem. The other picture here you see is pruning away the problem, which is cheating when you're in exhibition. But you'll see people, and that's one of the things that they call them passers when they're trying to enter your plant into a show. Whether a passer or a judge wants to know whether or not a plant has been clipped at the tips. And there's a whole art form to faking it and getting your plant looking well manicured and as good as it possibly can. And this sort of these brown tips, it happens to other plants like Sansevieria and the snake plant, some other plants too. And once it happens, it's really kind of best to fix the problem from the ground up. Change the water, address what's going on with that, and kind of see, hold back the fertilizer, and then just try to check the plant, maybe put it in a different position, maybe more indirect light, just try moving things around a little bit. This is the wandering dude. 70 species are native to North America. Most of it comes from Mexico. You'll see this in all different colors. Now, more purpley cultivars tend to predominate what's available in the trade, but they've been all different shades of green and purple and pink. They're very easy to grow. They do flower. They flower in late spring and early summer. Sometimes indoors you won't see that as much. If you're someone that puts your plants outdoors as a patio plant, you're more likely to see this phenomenon. Because you're going to get more changes in humidity and more changes in light exposure. The purple growth is the new growth on the plant, and the green growth is the older growth on the plant. Triascantia likes higher humidity and moist soil. It could be left outside, but this is one of those plants that you don't want it to get caught in the freeze because you'll lose it. Also, if it goes on too long without watering, if you're on a 2-week vacation or 3-week vacation, as easy to grow as this and as hardy as it is, you'll lose this one. It'll start to die from the pot, then die to the stem, and then you're left with little stems you're trying to save, and then you become a wandering dude, hospital, trying to keep them alive in water. And don't do that. Just keep them in a pot and water them, and keep an eye on them. They're very hardy. Wandering dude is pretty easy to propagate, as well as a lot of other plants. The propagation technique is pretty simple. You would use clean scissors or hand pruners. You'd wipe it with 10% bleach or 70% ethanol. I like to use a little alcohol wipe and just kind of go across either a pair of scissors or a pair of hand pruners, or even a steak knife if that's all you have. You can cut healthy sections. You want to do 2 to 3 leaf sections per cutting if you can. And then you want to place it in a clean dechlorinated room temperature water, preferably in glass. And those plant cuttings will start to, the cuttings will start to root out. And when they get, you can see on there, those little white roots that are coming off down from where the bud is, straight down. That's about an inch and a half. And that's only from a couple of days in the right circumstances. Normally, these things take weeks. So to be patient with them, but once they get to be at least an inch, they're good to go into pots with a good soil mix, maybe a little bit of rock at the bottom of the pot, an earthy mix. Plant them and then put a covering on the top of the pot. So that's an easy one, and so Wandering Dude is a good plant to share with friends. Some of the other cultivars, they're really beautiful. I go out to East Earl in Lancaster County, and there's a lot of nurseries out that way that are part of that system. There's different nursery tour systems that the Hardy Plant Society have put out. And you'll see a lot of these different types. You'll see at least 9 or 10 different cultivars of Wandering Dude out there, and they're all really fantastic. Very few of them are not hardy, but if you ever put them in terrariums or anything where you're really kind of stressing them, where it's too moist or too all of one condition, you'll see which ones don't make it. But Wandering Dudes hold up to quite a bit. They really and they're beautiful as they start to grow out. They also make a very good hanging plant. Aloe vera is, the plant of the 70s. This is your retro house plant. It's an easy care indoor plant. It is the most famous succulent. It's also the fastest growing. It loves water. It's really hard to overwater an aloe, but you can. It likes sandyish soil, but it still likes to have some nutrition to it. It likes indirect light. It likes direct light. It likes indirect and direct light. It's very tolerant. But if you start to see problems at the tips, or you start to see any kind of rot down the base, take a look. Not too many pests really hit this thing. You're more likely to have a pest problem with aloe vera when you're transferring plants from one place to another, or if you leave it out and slugs get it, or aphids get it, or biting beetles get it. There's a chance, if it's just not watered and it's hot and you're away, that the plant will take on a little pest pressure. But for the most part, aloe vera is a very happy plant. Great to have. There's so many uses with an aloe vera. And those cuts that you make, if you wind up having to sack a leaf for a burn or for skin care or anything, you can really cut them back, and within a month or two, you get that plant looking good. It's tough once you start hacking at it to get those things looking show quality, but a well-loved aloe plant that has a leaf or two missing that's moving on and growing from there, it's still a beautiful plant. Some people still have their aloe plants from the 70s. There are master gardeners that do. So, philodendron, another classic 70s plant that's made a full-on revival. This is the easiest plant to take care of. It can be done as a hanging plant or a tabletop. It really needs infrequent watering. This is one where you really want to stick your finger in the pot, kind of see how it is. This plant has been cut and divided and shared with people, offices all over North America. This is a very common plant that tends to grow down old file cabinets and bookshelves and desks. And when people prune them, they wind up giving the prunings to their friends, and they get them going from there. It needs to be fertilized, but they'll hang in there for a long time without it. But if you're promoting the cycle of vining, you're going to want a little bit more nitrogen, so you would stick to the fertilization schedule. If you're sick of all this growth, it's too much for you, just kind of choke off a little bit. But these are beautiful plants. With houseplants, the way it kind of tends to work is that the deeper green and the waxier and the more and thicker that the leaf gets, the less sun that it needs. Not always true, but usually true. And you'll start to see, as you get into a philodendron and darker leafed, darker pigmented leaves, they'll be able to get away with less light. Pothos is really another great plant. This is, a 60s and 70s plant that's made a full-on. I think the cultivar you see out there now is golden pothos, but it needs very infrequent watering. You get away with about once a week. Stick your finger in the pot, make sure it's dried out in between the waterings. It likes high humidity. Like orchids, they tend to do well either in bathrooms or next to bathrooms. They'll really love that, but they don't require it.
Tu l'as-tu entendu, lui, cette nuit, aller prendre de l'eau?
Pothos in almost any room in the house. It likes indirect light. It will fry in a southern-facing window or a window that's bending the light from the west, or if it's a hot summer day. So that is probably one of the few things. it does draw a lot of nutrients from the soil as well. So it will need to be repotted as it grows. This is one that probably does best with adding a little bit of compost or organic matter to it as opposed to straight prepared liquid fertilizer. Liquid fertilizers, all fertilizers have a certain level of salt to them, and salt tends to pollute soils. And so over time, using liquid fertilizers will slightly increase the salt amount in your media, which would require to be flushed, having plenty of waterings in between. So the more you're getting into drying soil out before you're watering it again, you're getting less chances to flush out the salts and the fertilizers. So just keep that in mind with plants that need less watering, that they should also probably be fertilized with a more diluted solution or less, over time, the duration between fertilization should be less. Sometimes these guys get mites or aphids on them. If that happens, just take a very light Dawn or like a very light solution of it, and you can either spray it on plants or wipe the leaves. You can literally just kind of put it on a railing outside and just give it a good spray down and just kind of wipe through the leaves real quick. Very hardy plant, very great. Like the philodendron, very easy to divide. Peperomia. This is something you're seeing a lot of lately. There's 1,000 species of peperomia, and they all look different, and they all have different colors. Their hallmarks is thick, waxy leaves. They're drought tolerant, and they're sun loving. But one of the things people don't know when they repot is that the peperomia does better in more of an orchid mix, which has a lot of very loose, bigger chunks and pieces of soil, and it allows for more aerobic access to the soil. So and it precipitates better draining. Some people use perlite, but this isn't one that's necessarily recommended for it. But you water it when the top layer, and you stick your finger in the first little bit. When that's dry, that's when it's time to water peperomia. And these are some of the beautiful cultivars, and you'll see that the red ripple peperomia, that's one that you're seeing. This has been in show, this has been in exhibition. You're seeing this at Terrain, you're seeing this in East Earl, you're seeing this at Black Creek, you're seeing this, you're starting to see this in Lowe's and Home Depot. You'll see the jelly peperomia with the red fringes, and the watermelon peperomia. I think we just saw that at Longwood, on sale. That's becoming more commercially available in the trade, and really fantastic. And what you'll notice too is that the deeper, darker color of the red ripple, for instance, even though peperomia likes a lot of light, that peperomia cultivar will need a lot less light, because the darker it is, it's sort of naturally pulling back, saying, I'm just going to naturally be able to attract more light wave energy and photons towards the leaf. So its system requires less. The jelly peperomia is a little bit thicker. The red ripple is a little bit thinner. And the watermelon peperomia, if you haven't seen that, that's really a fantastic one. Dracaena. So this is the wild child of the houseplants. It's easy to grow. It's easy to maintain. It's got slim leaves, and it's actually pretty quick growing for a houseplant. It grows about in a 6-foot length in about 10 years. So that goes from tabletop to floor model. And this sort of is a plant you would add to your jungalow if you're doing more of those where you want to do an intensive planting of container plants inside your home. It likes slightly moist soil. The leaves kind of naturally start to fall off from the bottom, so they do what they call self-shedding. So it's okay to remove those leaves as they start to fall. And it's susceptible to scale and mealybug infections. That's really not so much a problem for you, because you're not going to have mealybug, but it might come from a place where you got it. So, and scale as well. And there are two things you really don't want in your plant collection. So sometimes when they're stressed, when they're being moved around and things, I just, I don't want to like trigger anybody saying the word quarantine, but I would recommend taking the plant and watering it, really kind of giving it a once through, look for any mechanical problems, any pests that are on it, and I would quarantine it. I'd have a little bit of a period where it's quarantined outside, a little bit of a period where it's quarantined inside, away from the rest of your collection. And then when you feel good about it, it's been enough time, maybe a few weeks, introduce it into your collection. You're going to get pests. It's impossible not to, but you don't want these two. You do not want scale, and you do not want mealybug. It can take out all the other ones. As you start to put more tender plants in, and you can see it outside what it does to things outside. They just, with the tender perennials, they just kind of make their way right through them. This is the ZZ plant. This is a foliage plant. You can actually get this to bloom. I've actually seen the ZZ plant in bloom one time at Produce Junction. And I wouldn't say that normally Produce Junction is a place I want to buy plants, but for whatever reason with certain house plants, I'm not sure if it's the way that they're delivering them or taking care of them. I'm not sure if they're hitting them with certain fertilizers or the climate, but I have seen rare blooming plants bloom there, So this is one of them. This is a wax, smoothie, and shiny leaf. It's beautiful. It's compact. It really doesn't get any taller than 3 feet. It likes direct light. This follows the theory of darker, thicker leaves need less light. You water when the pot is fully dry. This is probably one of the most disease and pest-resistant plants you could get. It's as healthy as a ZZ plant, really. And the only warning is that it's poisonous to cats and dogs. Not a plant that you want to put if you've got a cat that chews on leaves and things like that, or a dog that does that. But they can also be, put off to certain rooms and things. It's not necessarily a dog or a cat attractant, but just be wary. This is a great plant. Phalaenopsis, the moth orchid. A lot of times people hear, orchids are hard to maintain, or they're in bloom for a little while and then they die off, and I don't know if it's ever going to come back. I think I killed it. And so there's a lot of orchid misinformation going around. There's a lot of, and orchids, just through the cycle of the years, it's tough to have a plant that blooms, has no blooms, almost looks dead, starts to grow back and comes back. It doesn't fit most of the tropical type of houseplants we're used to. But make no mistake, orchids are beautiful. This particular one, the moth orchid, is a very low maintenance one. Like other orchids, it needs to be dry completely before watering. You might have heard with some orchids, you can use the ice cube trick, where you kind of lay the ice cube on top of your soil covering on top of your plant, and just kind of leave it on the mulch or the little piece of wood chip or whatever the orchid bark dressing that you have. You can just kind of leave it there to slowly drip down. And that's not bad. What's actually better than that is to use room temperature water and just hit it with very teeny tiny amounts. They have strong leathery leaves. They're very rich colored. They tend to be darker colored. They like indirect light. This is a great beginner orchid. They have this 4 months of bloom. Sometimes they get a second blooming for a couple months, and they can live for almost ever. I mean, this is really a very good investment. The only issue is you have to be able to remember that this isn't dead, that it's coming back, or that you can kind of reshuffle it to a different part of your window arrangement or your plant stand. If it not being in bloom changes the way that you would present it. This is a pilia. This is a favorite. They kind of look like coins attached by a stem. These were rare and very sought after plants in the US, and you're starting to see more of them in the trade. They're very easy to maintain. They're very easy to propagate. My my wife's stepmother had recently got a cutting from her stepmother, and we got it in Maine. It was in the cold. It was not well cared for. We got it home as best we could, took it out of the plastic, got it in water, and that thing is amazing. It's an amazing plant. It's easy to propagate. It doesn't need much. You can use regular soil. We did add a little bit of vermiculator pearl. I can't remember which it was to that one. It doesn't need very much light. It actually does very well under the cabinet lights, this one. And very easy to propagate. Take a cutting, get it into water, and they're really fantastic. They're beautiful just the way they pop out. They kind of look like fancy nasturtium a little bit, you know. Not everybody agrees with me on that, but and Sansevieria, the snake plant. There's two different types. One's Massiana, that's the whale fin type, and which is just a thicker leaf that kind of comes out. And then there's what they call the mother-in-law's tongue or snake plant, which is the one you're seeing here. They like indirect light. They're drought tolerant, but they do like water. They don't want to be watered every day unless you're using small amounts of water. But still, every day is probably too much. They're slower growing, and their propagation's tougher. You really kind of gotta let them auto propagate a little bit and kind of pull off from the base. And every time you pull off from the base with one of these guys, it can be traumatic. So we really have to kind of, as we're pulling the piece off, we have to get the next piece out into water and really kind of, you know, nurture and mommy that little piece that we just kind of ripped away from. They are resistant to pests. They do have diseases of overwatering and nutrition. These can have their tips go, you know, start to turn brown. They can get holes or different weird filling in them and things. They usually it's usually the problem is in the soil at the root zone level. So in terms of potting, planting, and repotting houseplants, a big part of it is placement. What does this plant need? Does it need indirect sun or direct sun? Where does the winter sun go in your neighborhood? Where does the summer sun go? There's an angle. There's an axis that changes. Do you put them in east and west facing windows? Those are usually good bets. In bigger collections where you have maybe one big window or two windows, you're going to try to get as many plants into the window as you can, particularly in apartment living. Maybe you only have one really great window that's got good access. So you'll start to change your arrangement. You might have certain plants that are up front. You might start to turn your plants. There are collectors that put some other plants on turnstiles that give it a little quarter turn every day and move it around on a tabletop. Placement's important. Most of the varieties can withstand some range in temperature. Almost none of the house plants can withstand a cold snap. So if you happen to leave these plants out, as I've learned with Alocasia, Sumo, which is a beautiful show plant we had, you know, they might live. You might lose everything that you see above the soil, or parts thereof, and it might grow back. But they're going to be more likely dead or dying if they're stuck out too long outside or in an area where they're not well maintained temperature wise. Most of them like rich, moist soil. The watering frequency does vary on a lot of these, and the covering is very important. In another talk I give on gardening, we talk a lot about wood chips and the importance of wood chips outside. For a lot of years, we saw mulch, and mulch is a great covering. We've seen stone. Stone's a great covering. Grass is a great covering for soil, and hay and straw are great coverings. But the best covering for most plants is wood chips. And the reason for that is that outside, wood chips draws moisture, dew, in the air at night, and it draws it into the cell wall of the particle of the wood chip. And it takes it on, and as it lets it go, as it's needed in the level below, it naturally just goes to an area where there's not as much moisture, and it moves down in the downward direction. So as it does that, it takes it uses the rain to pull compost tea basically out of the wood chip down into the soil. And as it does that, as it's covered, it provides an environment where it's perfectly pH balanced and controlled. It's transforming the soil and it's adding organic material to it. It can't always turn deadpan, clay into humus, but it can actually loosen deadpan and add organic material to it. So wood chips is just fantastic. And if you add water to wood chips, it's really amazing. And when in doubt about about a covering for a plant, use wood chips. Use wood chips so you have something else if you have nothing, because a wood covering is better. Wood chip covering is better than nothing, and is actually optimal for most plants. Some plants do better with the orchid bark. Orchid bark is also beautiful, definitely with orchids and things of that nature. But it's really important in cleaning your pots. If you're starting to see residue on your pots, take a sponge and clean them with warm water, maybe even warm soapy water. Get them to the point where they're looking almost like when you had them, because you need to monitor for salt and other kind of buildup. And as you start to see the buildup, you start to be able to see what's going on at the root zone. That's your only indication, short of pulling the entire plant out of the pot and looking at the roots themselves.
Rich, I just wanted to ask you, Bonnie was wondering, do you mean the kind of wood chips you put in your garden beds outside when you're talking about the wood chips?
Yeah, you can use wood chips like those. They're a little bit rough and big for a pot. And you can also buy wood chips in a bag from the nurseries. Sometimes they sell it as orchid moss or bark. Sometimes they're going to sell it as just small scale wood chips. But you definitely want to use something like that to cover your plants. If you don't have horticultural pebbles are good too. But there's really nothing that's better than wood chips for most plants, even inside.
Okay.
So where do you secure plant material? Well, for a long time, most people went to garden centers and nurseries. They went to big box stores. Now, in order to get some of the cultivars that you might want, you might have to go to an online nursery. You might have to go to an arboretum when they have something on sale, or a library plant sale. They're bringing something up in a truck from Florida. You might find a specialty grower on Facebook Marketplace who does Pilia peperomoides, and they just became naturally experts in propagating it, and it's a $15 plant from them, and it's healthy and it's beautiful. So there's all different kind of ways to do it. You can also ask a master gardener and call the Hort line. The Hardy Plant Society has a nursery tour list. You don't need to go do the tour. We can give you the list. They're excellent, but they're also they also depend on revenue for their nonprofit activities. They're really a fantastic group, the Mid-Atlantic Hardy Plant Society. They've done a tour that goes through the part of Lancaster County, and they do one that goes through Chester back into the main line. And some of the highlights on that are, not that I'm telling you to go to any specific nursery, but East Earl has a lot of really great nurseries. There's about 7 or 8 nurseries that are there. Black Creek is kind of like a supermarket. They have perennials on one side, annuals on the other. It's like 2 supermarkets put together for plants. There's a lot out there. Salters, Horst. You can't go wrong. You make a day of it, and maybe stop at the Shady Maple or something while you're out there for lunch or something. But the Chester County one is one I go on less, which I think it also includes terrain. That might be sort of one of the ending points of that, but it also takes you out to the production nurseries. And like I said, we have the master gardeners, Holly, anybody on the Hort line, myself. We can send you a list of nurseries if you're interested. Where do I find pots and planting material? Well, you can also find it in the same places that you find the plants, although usually what you find is that big box stores will make the plants cheap and they make the pots expensive. Particularly the espoma type soil mixes and things like that. Most people don't look at a plant and think, how much it's actually going to cost once it's all potted up and well taken care of. In Williamsburg, they actually produce a lot of plant pots and containers, both for indoors and for outdoor use. One of the things I would just like to bring to your attention is that some pots are made that don't drain. They're sort of decorative pots, and they're made to sort of sink your temporary pot into. You'll see a ton of these. These are in Lowe's and Home Depot. These are everywhere. And these are, a common way to sell a plant in the winter or in the spring. Sometimes they even, you'll see these in IKEA, places like that. They'll sell a non-draining pot. Usually it's a terrible idea because most people that water their pots never pull it up to look at it, and they don't realize the root rot that's going on underneath. And the plant starts to yellow and the plant starts to have tips. And by the time you've figured out that it's, oh my God, it's laying in 3 inches of water and it's literally rotting from the bottom, the plant is almost a lost cause by then. So for the most part, I recommend not using pots that don't drain. There's a time and a place for it. If there's a party and you want to make a certain area look nicer, you're going to be on top of it and you're going to dump it out and check it all the time. But it just doesn't get very good aeration. It doesn't get very good drainage in a non-draining pot. So another place you'll see it is plant sales, swaps, and member events. There's a lot of people that switch over. Some people, when Italian terracotta became available on the market 5 to 10 years ago, people said, for $1 extra a pot, I want to switch to these beautiful gray pots, or I want some, Williams and Sonoma fancy pot, or I want, this other glazed pot. You'll see that people will start to abandon some of their pots and their saucers, and that's a great time to pick it up. Sometimes you'll see people with a box selling the whole box for $20. That's a grab. Do it. Grab all of them. Plant sales, thrift stores, consignment shops, harder because a lot of times you go to a thrift shop, you'll see a pot for $2 or $3, and you can buy a new terracotta pot for $2 or $3, in East Earl. Garage sales and yard sales, always pretty good. But people that own pots sometimes tend to overestimate the value of a pot. You tend to get better deals, not always, but you tend to get better deals when someone's just trying to get rid of a bunch of them. And that's really when they have 5, 10, 15, 20 pots and lids, and maybe they have an assortment. They don't have quite the right thing for everything. That's perfect. Craigslist and FreeCycle, I found stuff on all of those before. And then, like I said, always ask a master gardener, call the Hort line, call Holly, call the office, call the extension office. Ask. Just pick up the phone and ask. Write an email. Sometimes, most of the time, somebody can help you, point you in the right direction. And there's more information. This was sort of a basic discussion of houseplants. We can get into a more. We'll have more, talks through the year that'll get more into advanced houseplants and propagation. But I just want to make you aware that the extension does have articles, news. They have online courses, webinars. Other master gardeners like Ray Murphy and Joe Daniels and Debbie Ziegler have given different webinars and topics. They have their second Saturday edition. Very, very good. I don't know if you've attended any of Ray Murphy's pruning. He's the Nemours professional gardener at the Nemours Mansion. Goes into a very good explanation, very detailed, even online. So there's a lot of information out there. I just wanted to thank you for your time. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me over the internet, and we weren't doing this one in person. It could be fun either way, but I appreciate you hanging with me to the end here and willing to take it.
Thank you so much. It was really interesting. I have to tell you, I have a lot of plants and I don't know the names of any of them. So every time I recognize one, I wrote it down on a little piece of paper. I'm like, oh, that's what I have. I love that. And then everything you said, I think we have some questions here, but everything you said about the millennials, I just saw something in the New Yorker, and I didn't even know about millennials standing in line for plants. There was a big line of them. That's so funny. Let me just get this question. What can you tell us about the clivia plant?
I'm not an expert. I could provide some information, a sheet on it afterwards, and I can send it to you.
Okay, sure. If you send that to me, I can get it to Bonnie. Bonnie's the one asking the question.
Sorry about that.
Okay, can you hear me? And it's funny, I'm looking, Linus had said he had no luck with the wandering dude plant.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I was away from the office for 5 days, and I had some dying pieces come on mine.
Oh.
I'm not sure if it's the time of year, but also during the pandemic, I've lost the wandering dude twice now, and it's listed as Tradescantia is like one of the hardiest plants, but I don't know what I did myself, but it will come back. Like I could cut from that piece and start cuttings and whatnot, but it's limping in there. It's really
Right.
it's not this. I showed you a picture of a really great wandering dude, but in my own experience during the pandemic, I've had some troubles myself.
Okay. All right. Well, then that makes us all feel a little bit better if you're having trouble.
Yeah, probably watering too much, I would say, is a common problem with wandering dude.
Okay. Okay, great. And I think that's all the questions. Thank you so much. We all learned a lot. Just so everyone knows, Rich why am I mangling your name? Kedansis will also be starting your summer garden on March 1st. And Rich, we're going to try to do that in person.
Right.
You and I'll stay in touch. If we think we're not ready for it, we'll do another Zoom,
Sure.
if that's okay for you.
Yes.
And I recorded tonight. So if you missed the beginning, I let a couple of people in late. I'm going to send everyone the recording in the next couple of days. And that's about it. I'm Eileen Matola from Haverford Township Recreation Department. Thank you for joining us. And thanks so much, Rich.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.